Let's talk about burgers. But first, let's talk about price. When you go to buy something, there's always a price. That number theoretically represents the cost of the good to the person selling it, and, ideally, the value of the good to you. When those two are the same, you can confidently hand over your dollars. A fair trade. But often, the price is misleading. There might be costs from the good's production or value in its consumption that the price does not account for. These extraneous costs, the unintended consequences, you might say, are called externalities. And when they go unaccounted for in the price, our decisions as buyers can become distorted. We think a good might cost a certain amount, but it might actually cost far more. The trade might be unfair. But what does that mean, really? What do externalities look like in the real world? Well, consider the burger, America's favorite sandwich. It's fatty and salty and juicy and perfect for that backyard barbecue in late summer we all daydream about. To explore what externalities show up in our food, we're going to zoom in on the true costs of 3 different burgers. For our first burger, we'll turn to a fast food drive-thru. To start, where does that sweet, spongy bun come from? In America, it probably comes from Ohio or Texas, and it's probably made with all the parts you'd expect: flour, yeast, salt, sugar. So what could be so hidden about those costs? It's practically local. Well, for starters, the bread came out of a factory instead of a person's hands. And because fast food corporations concentrate production for millions of buns at a time, the ovens in the factories pump a proportional amount of pollution into the air, known as volatile organic compounds. The smog that results from this type of pollution causes heart, lung, and brain disorders and all sorts of cancers. And who pays for that? The factories abandon the sick people to deal with it on their own. Say hello to externalities. So, okay, what if in order to avoid those unsavory externalities of bun making, we go bunless instead? Well, the patty part is actually much more complicated. Cows eat soy and corn, which are responsible for the rapid deforestation of the Amazon and the global loss of healthy topsoil. Plus, corn and soy don't digest well in cow stomachs since they're meant to eat grass. And when cows burp, the methane they produce is 20 times more potent than carbon dioxide at warming the planet. Not to mention the cost of transporting Brazilian grain to American cows and transporting those same cows to processing facilities and then sending those processed patties to fast food freezers across the nation. All that transporting churns out tons and tons of additional carbon dioxide on top of all those bovine belches we already mentioned. Who pays for the environmental and health costs of all that pollution? Your combo meal doesn't even begin to cover the cost of those supersized externalities. At this point, you're probably thinking, the tomatoes and lettuce must be better, right? Wrong. Growing produce at massive scales often involves water contaminated with animal feces, which is why E. coli outbreaks are a dime a dozen. Do you have any idea what it costs to deal with the consequences of an E. coli outbreak? Even beyond that, since fast food chains need so much produce at once for the number of people they feed, other countries grow the veggies to ship them miles and miles before they ever get to our takeout bags. Refrigerated transport of those tomatoes often costs double in CO2 what it costs to grow them in the first place. That's to say nothing of how a tomato slice or lettuce leaf tastes after traveling that far. One chef described the flavor as tragic and insipid. Oh, sorry, that was me. Say it with me, people. Externalities. If we were to go to a drive-thru right now, this burger would look mighty attractive. Just a few bucks in exchange for a classic, comforting meal. But look closer, and this burger costs way more than the price listed on the value menu. From the volatile organic compounds to the methane to the E. coli, this burger carries with it additional hidden costs to our health and our environment. And since we remain disconnected from the whole global enterprise, right up to when we order from a computer screen instead of a person, It injures us socially too. That is one expensive burger. The price tag lies. So, okay then, let's ditch the drive-through line and head to a local farm-to-table joint. The price tag there says it costs more, but let's see what the externalities say. The bun, for starters, came from a baker, which is way better than a factory. Relying on a person instead of a machine means fewer pollutants and more quality flavor. But the flour came from another state, and the grain came from the same seeds the rest of the wheat-eating planet uses. This practice of using one type of seed for the whole global food supply, called monocropping, accounts for 80% of agriculture worldwide. And it might not be an expensive behavior, except that it leaves our global agri-food system extremely vulnerable to collapse, because one well-evolved disease can wipe out the entire strain, and with it, the majority of wheat that shares the same genes. The wheat economy would crumple. How much does that risk cost? As for the meat, it comes from a locally grass-fed and finished cow, meaning that it grazed and foraged its whole life just a few hours away. So the transportation cost on air quality is lower, but finishing cows on grass actually creates a bigger environmental cost than finishing them on all that supremely expensive grain we mentioned. When cows eat only grass, they take sometimes twice as long to mature, which costs more food and more water, and in the end, doesn't yield as much meat. On the other hand, many agree that grazing cows is much more humane. And still others say lifelong grazing results in a gamey, lean meat that doesn't taste as good. So many confusing externalities. How can we tally all this into a dollar value? Well, at least the lettuce and tomatoes should be easy to love. They come from a farm just a couple hours away, hand-planted by a small, family-owned business. The only trouble there is that in the wintertime, the local growers must rely on greenhouses to continue producing the summery vegetables year-round. And greenhouses actually produce 8 times the amount of CO2 as the imported veggies from warmer countries do. What the heck? So even our local burger comes slathered with externalities, as if farm-to-table eating weren't expensive enough. Before you decide to give up eating altogether, which comes with its own set of externalities to be sure, let's talk about some positive externalities in all of this burger business. This third burger marks a special occasion, when once a year the whole neighborhood assembles in the name of good meat. Your neighbor makes the bun. He buys the heirloom wheat from the farmer just south of you, who also raises chickens and goats and potatoes and beans. And another neighbor mills the wheat since she's the only one with the big mill. Because the community needs local bread to eat, these jobs are their only jobs. The cost of their time is paid by their neighbors, which frequently includes you since their bread is so good. It tastes dark and nutty, and the texture is airy and chewy and complex all at once. The meat comes from one cow, a small 4-foot Dexter named Janice, who has lived in your community her whole life. She thrived off wild local forage and enjoyed a robust social life. Everybody knew and loved Janice, not only the diverse animals in her barn, but the kids who would walk past her pasture on the way to school. She produced milk and butter as long as she was able and now has reached a fat and happy end of life. The neighborhood butcher carefully processes her body for ground beef, yielding 1,400 patties, enough for everyone in the neighborhood to eat together. In this burger, your meat didn't come from 100 different sick, corn-stuffed, numbered animals many miles away. Instead, your meat came from one dairy cow who ate locally, meant something to your community, and whose small stature and wild diet meant a significantly lower impact on air than ordinary CAFO beef. Because you have only a few animals in your neighborhood, this burger cookout happens only once in a blue moon. The rest of the year, you eat plants. This meat's value comes from its scarcity. The tomatoes and lettuce you grow yourself in a hydroponic community garden 3 blocks from your apartment. The tomatoes are a juicy heirloom variety called Black Krim, and the lettuce is the thick, flavorful butter crunch bib. With these seeds, you have full control over your food. The hydroponic design of the garden saves 90% of land and water while increasing crop yield 3 to 10-fold. And the community nature of your growing practice means you can spend time with friends and family while planting and harvesting food to support each other. How's that for some externalities you can really sink your teeth into? If environmental degradation, clogged arteries, and social isolation are expensive and dangerous and a threat to our future, then surely community, wellness, and morality are the opposite: just, vibrant, and sustainable. In a world where our economic systems chase growth, we scrape by and bleed out to trash our planet and eat styrofoam sandwiches alone in our cars. In a world where our systems support eudaimonia, we become wealthier the more we participate. We can be wealthy with relationships and wealthy with topsoil, wealthy with food sovereignty and compassion, with flavorful tomatoes and sustainable meat. What will you put on your plate?